The year is 1645. Deep in the mountains of Kumamoto, an aging Miyamoto Musashi walks slowly toward a silent cave known as Reigando, the Spirit Rock Cave. His hair is thin, his body weak, but his presence remains unshakable. He has lived through more than 60 battles, duels, near-death encounters, and the long solitude of a wandering swordsman. Now, sensing his final days approaching, he chooses to leave behind not techniques of combat, but the truths he uncovered about life itself. Inside the cave, the wind slips through the stone cracks like a whisper. Musashi sits on a worn mat, places a single candle before him, and takes out his brush. His hand trembles, not from fear, but from age. Yet every stroke he writes carries unmatched clarity. These final teachings will become the Dokkodo, the way of walking alone. Musashi writes not for students of swordsmanship, but for anyone seeking freedom from confusion, attachment, and weakness. He had learned that a person can master every weapon in the world and still be defeated by their own mind. So his last gift is not a manual for battle, but a guide for inner discipline, a path toward living without unnecessary suffering. He begins with a principle that reflects a lifetime of harsh truth. Accept everything just the way it is. Musashi understood that resistance to reality creates pain. Warriors die because they wish the battlefield were easier. People suffer because they cling to expectations instead of observing life as it is. Acceptance does not mean surrender. It means seeing clearly, then moving with precision. The candle's flame trembles as Musashi pauses. He knows these words will outlive him. They carry the weight of a man who fought, wandered, starved, endured humiliation, tasted victory, and watched the world change around him. Each line of the Dokkodo is the voice of a man who has stripped away every illusion, every desire, and every distraction. In this cave, Musashi is not a legendary swordsman. He is an old man confronting truth. His final scroll is a map for anyone brave enough to follow a path of solitude, discipline, and self-mastery. And it begins here, with the acceptance of life exactly as it unfolds. Musashi's first precept, accept everything just the way it is more than a philosophical idea. It is the foundation of every victory he ever achieved. To Musashi, acceptance was not a passive state. It was the courage to see reality without distortion. He had watched countless warriors fall, not because they lacked skill, but because they could not face the world as it truly was. They wished their opponent were weaker. They wished conditions were better. They wished fear would disappear. But wishes never win battles. Musashi learned this truth early in his life. At 13, he fought his first duel against a seasoned samurai. Terrified, barefoot, and armed with nothing but a wooden staff, he faced a man twice his age in strength. Musashi did not hope for mercy or imagine a different outcome. He accepted the moment completely, the fear, the danger, the possibility of death. From that acceptance came clarity, and from clarity came action. He won. This chapter shows how acceptance sharpens perception. When Musashi stepped into a duel, he observed everything: the opponent's stance, breathing, foot placement, hesitation. His mind was not clouded by desire or panic. Acceptance allowed him to adapt instantly, to turn weakness into strategy. He understood that a warrior who argues with reality dies quickly. But Musashi's message goes far beyond combat. In life, we often resist situations we cannot change. We want people to behave differently. We want outcomes to follow our plans. We want the world to fit our expectations. When it doesn't, we feel frustration, anger, disappointment. Musashi teaches that this resistance is the true enemy. Acceptance does not mean giving up. It means confronting what is real so that your next step is grounded, intentional, and powerful. A person who accepts reality becomes unshakable because nothing surprises them. They adjust instead of breaking. They move instead of freezing. As the camera fades back to the dim cave of Reigando, Musashi pauses after writing his first precept. His eyes reflect a lifetime of understanding. This simple line is not merely instruction, it is the key to freeing oneself from illusion. For Musashi, acceptance was the beginning of courage, clarity, and mastery. And without mastering this first step, the rest of the path cannot be walked. The second precept of Musashi's Dokkodo is sharp like a blade. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. At first glance, it sounds strict, even harsh. But Musashi wasn't warning against happiness, he was warning against dependence. He had watched people become slaves to comfort, pleasure, and distraction, losing the strength that discipline could have given them. To him, desire was a chain that tightened quietly, without the person noticing. In Musashi's youth, he lived without luxury. He slept outdoors, ate simple food, and owned almost nothing. This was not because he wanted to suffer. It was because he understood that the more a person needs, the weaker they become. A warrior who requires ideal conditions cannot fight when the world turns hostile. A mind addicted to comfort collapses when faced with hardship. Musashi chose the opposite path, a path of independence from craving. In this chapter, the scene shifts to a memory from Musashi's wandering years. Traveling alone through rain-soaked roads, his clothes torn, his feet blistered, he stops beneath a tree to rest. A passing merchant offers him shelter and warm sake. For a moment, the temptation flickers in his eyes, but Musashi refuses politely and continues walking into the storm, not out of pride, but because he knows pleasure can soften resolve. He does not allow temporary comfort to weaken long-term purpose. Musashi believed that a person who constantly seeks pleasure cannot see life clearly. Desire distorts judgment. It creates fear of losing what feels good. That fear makes a warrior hesitant, emotional, easily manipulated. To live freely, one must loosen the grip of craving. Only then can the mind remain steady, even when the world becomes chaotic. But Musashi's lesson is not about rejecting life's joys. It is about rejecting their control over you. To enjoy without attachment, that is true strength. A person who can walk away from comfort is stronger than a person who chases it endlessly. As the chapter closes, we return to the cave. Musashi finishes writing the second precept, his brush leaving a bold stroke. His eyes soften. He knows this lesson will be misunderstood by many, but essential for a few. The Dokkodo is a path for those who seek unshakable clarity, a path that begins by mastering desire before desire masters you. Musashi's third precept reads, "Do not, under any circumstances, depend on a partial feeling." Many misunderstand this line, but in Musashi's world, partial feeling meant attachment, emotional dependence on things, people, or outcomes that are temporary. To Musashi, dependence was danger. Anything you cling to becomes a weakness. Anything you fear losing controls you more than you control yourself. In this chapter, the camera drifts through Musashi's sparse life. His belongings fit into a small cloth bag, a brush, ink, a worn robe, and a wooden practice sword. He owned no house, no luxury, no ornaments, not because he was poor, but because he refused to carry anything unnecessary. Musashi understood that possessions anchor the mind. The more someone owns, the more they must defend. The more they defend, the more fear grows. Musashi had watched samurai lose duels because they fought to protect pride, rank, money, or reputation. Their hearts were divided, their minds clouded. A warrior cannot strike cleanly if he fears losing something. Clarity demands emptiness, and emptiness demands letting go of attachment. This belief guided Musashi even in relationships. Though he respected others deeply, he did not cling to anyone. He never allowed emotional dependence to shape his decisions. A warrior who cannot stand alone collapses when support is removed. Musashi's strength came from walking a path where nothing could be taken from him, because he had already released it. A key scene unfolds along an old riverside. A young swordsman approaches Musashi, carrying multiple swords, heavy armor, and decorated clothing. He proudly boasts of his wealth and skill. Musashi listens quietly, then points to the river flowing past them. "The river carries nothing," he says, "and so nothing can hold it back." The young man does not understand, but years later he will. To depend on partial feelings, comfort, praise, status, desire, is to tie one's freedom to unstable ground. Musashi teaches that emotional neutrality is not coldness, it is strength. When the heart is free from grasping, the mind acts with precision. Returning to the dim cave of Reigando, Musashi adds another stroke to the Dokkodo scroll. His eyes reflect a truth he lived for decades. The path to mastery is a path of shedding, not accumulating. When you own nothing, fear has nothing to hold on to. Musashi's fourth precept delivers a powerful message. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. This teaching challenges one of the greatest weaknesses Musashi observed in warriors, the obsession with personal desire. Men were defeated not by lack of skill, but by their ego's hunger, the desire to be praised, to be feared, to be admired. Musashi knew that when a person thinks too heavily of himself, he becomes blind to everything else. In this chapter, the camera opens on a quiet morning in Musashi's wandering years. He walks along a dusty road, watching farmers work in silence. Their movements are simple but purposeful. Unlike samurai obsessed with rank and recognition, the farmers labor without expecting glory. Musashi recognizes their quiet strength. They contribute to the world without being consumed by ego. This observation becomes a turning point in his philosophy. A warrior who places himself at the center of everything becomes fragile. Insults hurt him, failure humiliates him, loss breaks him. But a warrior who sees the world as greater than himself becomes stable, grounded, and unshakable. He is not easily offended, distracted, or manipulated. Musashi teaches that the self must be light, flexible, humble, and empty of arrogance. When the self becomes heavy, it drags a person down like armor filled with stones. The mind becomes defensive, thoughts become slow, decisions become clouded. In combat, this is fatal. In life, it leads to endless suffering. By thinking deeply of the world, Musashi means expanding awareness beyond personal wants, understanding human nature, observing patterns, reading emotions, recognizing the flow of circumstances. These are the skills that give a person true power. A warrior who understands the world will always outperform one who understands only himself. A key cinematic moment shows Musashi sitting by a riverside, carving a wooden practice sword. A young disciple asks him why he never boasts about his victories. Musashi replies, "If I praise myself, I stop learning. If I think only of myself, I stop seeing." His voice carries neither pride nor false humility, only clarity. The precept teaches that ego is the enemy of growth. The more lightly you hold yourself, the easier it becomes to adapt, improve, and evolve. Thinking deeply of the world is how a person escapes the narrow prison of self-importance. As Musashi finishes writing the fourth precept inside the dim cave, his candle flickers. He has lived as a warrior, artist, poet, and strategist, but he always remained a student of the world. That, he believed, is the true path to mastery. Musashi's fifth precept reads, "Be detached from desire your whole life long." This line forms the backbone of the Dokkodo, because Musashi believed that desire, especially for material things, is the root of unnecessary suffering. A warrior burdened by possessions becomes slow. A mind attached to comfort becomes fragile. And a person who collects more than he needs eventually becomes owned by what he owns. In this chapter, the camera moves through the sparse interior of Musashi's cave. A single mat, a writing brush, a short blade, a wooden bowl, nothing more. Musashi was not living in poverty. He was living in deliberate freedom. Every object he carried had to serve a purpose. Everything else was excess. He understood that possessions create obligation, and obligation creates fear. To detach from desire meant to detach from fear itself. A flashback reveals Musashi's younger years when he observed wealthy samurai traveling with servants, trunks of silk garments, and polished armor. They looked powerful from the outside, but Musashi saw their weakness. They worried constantly about theft, damage, respect, appearance. Their minds were filled with anxiety about maintaining status. Musashi realized that this anxiety could be used against them. A fighter with too much to lose fights with hesitation. Freedom, he concluded, was not measured by what a person owned, but by what he could walk away from. Another scene shows Musashi stopping at a roadside inn. The owner offers him a fine sword, beautifully decorated and carved with gold. Musashi lifts it, studies it, then sets it down with a calm smile. A sword's beauty does not make it sharp, he says. He chooses instead to keep his plain, worn blade, reliable, unpretentious, and free from vanity. This simple decision captures the heart of the precept. True strength comes from simplicity. Detachment does not mean rejection. Musashi never hated comfort, beauty, or possession. He simply refused to be ruled by them. To desire something is normal, but to need it desperately, to let it shape your decisions, is the danger Musashi warns against. As the camera returns to Reigando, Musashi continues writing the Dokkodo. His brush moves slowly but firmly. He knows that humans naturally cling to what feels good, but he also knows this clinging blinds us. To walk the way of mastery, one must learn to release desire before desire becomes a prison. In the dim cave light, Musashi's lesson echoes. You are strongest, not when you hold tightly, but when you can let go without fear. Musashi's sixth precept states, "Do not regret what you have done." It is one of his most misunderstood teachings. Musashi is not telling us to ignore mistakes or avoid responsibility. Instead, he warns against the kind of regret that paralyzes the mind, the regret that chains a person to the past and steals his strength in the present. A warrior who dwells on yesterday cannot act clearly today. In this chapter, the camera opens on a cold dawn. Musashi walks along a narrow mountain path, the air heavy with fog. His mind drifts to the many duels he fought, some won with skill, others with brutal improvisation. He remembers a duel where he arrived late, covered in mud, his opponent angry and insulted. Musashi won, but people criticized him. They said he was dishonorable. Yet Musashi did not regret his choice. He accepted it as part of the path, learned from it, and moved forward. To him, regret was a form of attachment to an ideal version of yourself that never existed. He believed that when a decision is made, it becomes a stone in the road behind you. You can look back at it, but you cannot carry it with you. Regret is the act of picking up that stone and walking with unnecessary weight. A cinematic moment shows Musashi sitting by a fire after a long battle. A young samurai confesses that he regrets withdrawing from combat to save his own life. Musashi listens, then scoops a handful of water from a nearby stream. He opens his hand and lets the water fall. "The moment has already passed," he says. "Only fools try to hold what cannot be held." The young samurai watches the water disappear and slowly understands. Musashi teaches that every action, even flawed, becomes a lesson. Regret is only useful when it transforms into awareness. Beyond that, it becomes poison, weakening focus, distorting judgment, and turning a person against himself. A warrior cannot afford to fight both the enemy in front of him and the ghost of who he used to be. As we return to the dim light of Regando, Musashi finishes writing the sixth precept with a steady hand. He knows that the burdens of the past break more people than any sword. His message is not to ignore mistakes, but to free oneself from the emotional storm that stops growth. To walk forward boldly without being dragged backward by memory, that is the discipline of a true warrior. In Musashi's world, the past is a teacher, not a prison, and regret is nothing more than a shadow that disappears when one steps fully into the present. Musashi's seventh precept is stark and powerful. Do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love. At first, it seems extreme, especially coming from a man who lived fully, wandered freely, and interacted with people of all walks of life. Yet, beneath the surface, this teaching is not about suppressing human emotion. It is about clarity. Musashi knew that passion and attachment could cloud judgment, compromise discipline, and make a person vulnerable at the most critical moments. In this chapter, the scene opens with Musashi walking along a cliff overlooking the sea. Waves crash violently against jagged rocks below. He recalls duels fought not just with swords, but with emotions, anger, jealousy, desire. Each of these moments had almost cost him his life. He remembers opponents distracted by love or desire, acting recklessly. In contrast, Musashi moved with calm detachment, seeing the situation as it was, and surviving. This teaching extends beyond combat. Musashi saw how attachment distorts perception, making people predictable and weak. Desire creates fear of loss. Love, when clouded by need or obsession, makes one vulnerable to betrayal or disappointment. By observing his own life and the lives of others, he realized that emotional control is essential to mastery. To act without distortion, one must see clearly, unclouded by impulses. A cinematic vignette shows Musashi facing a young samurai who has fallen in love and allowed jealousy to guide his decisions. Musashi watches silently as the young man's fear and longing lead him into poor choices. Then he speaks. The heart guided by lust is blind. The mind guided by passion cannot strike true. The lesson is simple but profound. Detachment is a weapon, as sharp as the sword. Yet Musashi is not teaching coldness. He is teaching discernment, the ability to engage fully without being enslaved by emotion. Love and desire can exist, but they must never dictate action, cloud judgment, or control life. Freedom comes not from rejecting feeling, but from mastering it. Returning to Reigan-do, Musashi dips his brush into ink and writes the 7th precept with deliberate strokes. Each letter embodies decades of experience. The candlelight flickers, casting long shadows on the cave walls. The lesson resonates beyond swords and battles. It is a lesson of life itself, clarity, detachment, and self-mastery over fleeting impulses. Only those who walk this path can remain unshaken, even when facing death.
Musashi's 8th precept declares, "Do not be influenced by others." At first glance, it sounds like isolation, even stubbornness, but Musashi's wisdom goes far deeper. He knew that a mind swayed by the opinions, desires, or fears of others becomes weak. A warrior who cannot rely on himself cannot survive. A person who cannot think independently cannot live freely. True strength arises from self-reliance. In this chapter, the camera follows Musashi walking along a mist-covered ridge. He remembers being young, full of ambition, yet constantly looking to others for validation. He watched older samurai gain temporary respect through reputation and flattery, but fall when their own decisions were tested. Musashi understood that dependence on the approval or guidance of others is the chain that binds a person to mediocrity. Self-reliance for Musashi is not arrogance, it is clarity and courage. To act decisively, a person must trust his own mind, experience, and instincts. Others may offer advice, critique, or guidance, but the final choice must rest with oneself. A warrior who lets others dictate his movements in battle will die. A person who lets others dictate his life will live in constant fear and regret. A cinematic moment illustrates this truth. A young disciple seeks Musashi's approval, asking which techniques are best to master. Musashi remains silent for a long moment, then points to the flowing river below. "The water does not follow the wishes of the mountain," he says. "It flows as it must. Learn to flow without being swayed." The young disciple finally understands. Guidance can teach, but it cannot replace self-trust. This precept extends beyond combat. In relationships, in business, in life, people are influenced by social norms, gossip, and fear. Musashi warns that surrendering your judgment to others creates weakness, frustration, and dependency. The path of mastery is lonely because it requires courage, the courage to make decisions alone, to accept consequences, and to remain unshaken. Returning to the quiet cave of Reigan-do, Musashi dips his brush in ink, his hand steady despite age. Writing this precept, he reflects on his life as a wanderer, dualist, and thinker. Every choice he made alone strengthened his mind, sharpened his perception, and freed him from the chains of others' expectations. Independence is not isolation, it is empowerment. Musashi's message echoes through the centuries. To walk alone is not to walk lonely. It is to walk free, fully aware, and entirely oneself.
Musashi's 9th precept, and the essence of his Dokkodo, is, "Do not seek to possess either goods or people." At the heart of this teaching is freedom. Musashi understood that attachment, whether to material wealth, status, or relationships, is a chain that binds the spirit. True mastery, he believed, begins with independence, self-reliance, and clarity of mind. In this final chapter, the camera moves through the misty mountains surrounding Reigan-do. Musashi walks slowly, leaning on his wooden staff. The years of wandering, dueling, and studying the world have left him with neither fame nor fortune, yet his presence radiates something far greater: inner freedom. He carries only what is necessary. He desires nothing that might shackle his spirit. He has stripped life down to its essential truth. One walks alone, and in walking alone, one walks free. Musashi's philosophy was forged in the fires of life and death. Each duel, each hardship, each moment of solitude taught him the cost of attachment. Warriors die not only from swords, but from fear, greed, and the weight of expectation. Musashi's life was a lesson. The fewer the chains, the lighter the heart, the sharper the mind. To follow the Dokkodo is to embrace this clarity, to face the world unshaken by lust, love, fear, or desire. A cinematic flashback shows Musashi as a young duelist alone on a mist-covered battlefield. Opponents surrounded him, confident, heavy with armor and expectation. Musashi stands empty-handed, free from distraction. He moves like the wind, precise, fluid, inevitable. His freedom allows him to act without hesitation. His detachment becomes his strength. This is the living embodiment of the precepts he writes decades later. Returning to the cave, Musashi dips his brush in ink one last time. He writes each line with the precision of a lifetime of experience. The candlelight flickers, shadows stretching across the walls. The Dokkodo is complete. It is a path for those willing to walk without attachments, to see clearly, and to act decisively. It is not easy, it is not comforting, but it is truth. Musashi's final teaching is simple. Life is fleeting, and nothing is truly yours. To cling is to suffer. To release is to live fully. To walk alone is not loneliness, it is mastery. Those who can carry this wisdom, who can embrace discipline, detachment, and awareness, carry the spirit of Musashi within them. The cave grows silent. Musashi exhales slowly, knowing that the scroll he leaves behind will guide generations, a map of the mind, the heart, and the way of the warrior. And so the way of walking alone ends where it began, not with a sword, nor with victory, but with freedom, clarity, and the courage to walk one's own path.